Mi nombre es Juan José Castillo.
My name is Juan Jose Castillo, Air Advisor for PAHO, and
Questions in Spanish if that works well for you. And also, just to recap, this is the launch event 2A about reducing air pollution and health impacts from agriculture. So we celebrate that you are here. Usually, we speak about different emission sources. We just finished the session on transportation. We talk about industry. But from WHO, we acknowledge the issue that agriculture and the impacts of agriculture over air pollution and health. So we celebrate having this conversation all together about what are the practices that are implemented in the agriculture sectors to reduce air pollution and to increase health benefits. Addressing air pollution from agriculture is a critical step also towards mitigation of climate change. So we are honored to have today three excellent panelists, Dr. Kalpana Balakrishnan, Erin Saikawan, Sarah Vogel, and also we'll have a video from Christina Romanelli from WHO. The dynamic that we will have today is that we have our panelists will deliver 10 minutes presentations, and after that we will have a Q&A session. We encourage the audience to prepare their question and also to let us know about the work that you guys are doing. So without further delay, Dr. Kapana, please, the floor is yours. Welcome here with an applause. I can start so here and can go out. Oh, I have this, so I should have done this. So you take it.
Yeah, good afternoon. Great pleasure to be part of this session. And I was just speaking to Sarah just before. Part of this purpose of participating in this session is to trigger a conversation around a sector where not much has been, not much momentum has been gained, especially with respect to recognizing the air pollution contributions and to sort of link it to health. And so please forgive me if I don't seem so well informed about everything that's going on in this sector. I come in here as an air pollution expert working on the household air pollution sector, but deeply impacted by sectoral contributions from agriculture, because the same communities where where the problem of household air pollution prevails, which is a large part of my country, India, but also looking at where the agricultural emissions can play a part. So if you're looking at agricultural emissions, one of the things that's really important to recognize in countries like India, the sheer seamlessness of exposures is something that is so obvious to any of us who's living there or any of you are visiting us, but it's not something that we think about in the way we approach air pollution exposures. Somehow we think that we need to separate transport from power, from agriculture to solid cook fuel use. So the purpose of showing you this picture is to sort of remind ourselves and really being able to sort of address exposures. And if somebody is living in any of the areas in South Asia, specifically in India and in northern India, you are, really having a complex exposure from, multiple sectors. And whether you're rural or urban, it's just not going to be easy to tease this out. And the part about agricultural emissions that makes it particularly hard to include as a sectoral contribution is because these, I'm particularly focusing on crop residue burning from agriculture. So it's not all of agriculture. There are lots of impacts from agriculture for air pollution, but the part that I want to focus is on crop residue burning per se. And this is an episodic event. This is a seasonal event. This is, a lot of times, or rather, almost all the time, in places where there is no infrastructure for air quality monitoring. So it's really difficult to sort of even recognize this was a problem, until recently when we have other methods of air pollution, exposures, including satellite-based methods where we sort of, pick up the fire events and then the air pollution in a way that makes it possible for us to say, yeah, that is actually a big problem. And these sectoral contributions, especially because of the transboundary nature of this, is impacting ambient air quality in large adjoining cities where they are already sort of choking from sectoral contributions from non-agricultural emissions, so to say. So, and I just want to sort of put this in context, particularly from India. So, this whole issue of crop residue burning, and if you sort of look at, where Delhi's trajectory for was and or is, I grew up in New Delhi. So, back in the times when I was a kid, which was, of course, a very long time ago, but we never had this issue of suddenly things going so bad in October where you would not be able to see. I mean, if we had a lot of fog, but we didn't have the smog that I have no memory of, growing up in Delhi where this would be such an issue. But yet, I don't live in Delhi anymore, and I would you would really have to bargain in order for me to undertake a trip to Delhi in October or November. I am a borderline asthmatic, and I can guarantee that every time that I have attended even a meeting and stayed there for 3 or 4 days plus, I have an exacerbation, and it's very striking. And I've done this for the last 10 years. So, one of the things that I want to point out is this issue of crop residue burning has been, going on for the last maybe 20 to 30 years. And there are many drivers to recognize this. So that's the event that happens. Massive patches of agricultural land are burned, and it's essentially because of the increased mechanization of farming. Till such time, it was just a manual operation in which it was manual tilling, and there was a lot of gap between the seasons in terms of sowing, and then the second crop was not being planned for the next 2 3 months. The soil would energize itself with other forms of sort of feeding back the agricultural residues. And so the mechanized combine harvester essentially leaves a stubble that the farmers can't clear in the short time between one season and another season. And it's too expensive to buy some of those newer, gadgets that sort of allow you to, sow and till between seasons. So these, there are many technologies that are out there. And so essentially the marginal farmers are just not able to sort of be brought into the back picture. So you have many, 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 many marginal farmers, just like household air pollution is not an issue that you can ask the households to do something because there's no choice. These marginal farmers also don't have a choice in terms of how do they go about maintaining an output from their small hold landings, and to get them into a conversation is very difficult. And so one of the things that has happened, I just wanted to sort of put these things on the table for us to discuss. We have a new pair of eyes now with remote sensing methods, both for fire events and for PM estimations, and these are just getting better and better. But I would say that because of the way that the geostationary satellites operate, and because of the way that these events happen, sometimes over some hours in a day, it's been tricky to pick up the fire events, and the cloud cover during the seasonal inversions, the season that one is harvested and the other tends to be also most complicated by the temperature inversions. And therefore, the cloud cover is a major, roadblock for the satellite-based, estimations of PM 2.5 to sort of really be ground truth in a good way. And there is not, any air quality monitoring stations, reference gate monitoring stations in the rural areas that this is happening. But things are progressing. So this, for example, is just some of the publications that are coming up now to sort of look at how nuanced we have become in terms of being able to look at linking crop residue burning to contributions to air quality. Time might not permit me to sort of really go through the full publication, but essentially we have a fairly granular map at the all India level to look at what is the fractional increase in PM 2.5 that is attributable to crop residue burning. So this is basically linking to methane emissions that are very specific to crop residue burning. And then in the Indo-Gangetic Plain, which is the top part, this part there, where you must have heard in the other sessions throughout the conference, the Indo-Gangetic plain is the most impacted in all of India, mainly because of its extraordinarily large population, the size of many countries put together, the high population density, the large prevalence of biomass use, the importance of temperature inversions, and the transboundary transfers that happen. But we have been able to sort of really look at very pinpointed contributions from rice versus wheat crop residue burning. That's a very powerful way of sort of really looking at the economics of the whole thing. How much does rice bring in? How much does wheat bring in? How much would that impact, seasonal cycles? But to sort of really link at wheat associated fire events, rice associated fire events, wheat and rice associated increases in PM 2.5. The other important part that's also becoming big is you can see not just the Indo-Gangetic Plain, which is up here, but to sort of really look at all the cities, including the national capital region, and essentially this proportion of of contribution of crop residue burning to the larger, airshed, so to say. So the hot spots of crop residue burning contribute anywhere between 65 to 70% of the total PM 2.5 contributions to the entire airshed. So wherever crop residue burning happens, it is clearly happening at a scale where these emissions are ending up contributing to a very large part of the PM 2.5 exposure attribution in the whole airshed. And this is yet another piece of development that has happened in India. And I want to sort of look at, the most recent nuanced emissions inventory that has happened under the initiation or the initiative of the Ministry of Environment and Forests, is to sort of really look at these airsheds. So if you're looking at, 1, 2, 3, 4 airsheds across the country, where you have, the high exposure airshed right there, the medium exposure right there, and sort of the low exposure airshed. So it's not just airsheds with different source contributions, but it is also airsheds that are very characteristically different in the overall population weighted PM 2.5 exposure profiles. And if you look at the sectoral contribution across these high, medium, and low PM 2.5 exposure airsheds, two things, really stand out is that, if you look at agricultural contributions and residential contributions, it's the green part of the pie and the yellow part of the pie, which is, the residential sector. So you look at, despite it being a rather unrecognized sector in terms of the overall contributions, the emissions inventories, and this has been replicated across multiple emissions inventories. We would have thought that we would not have been able to pick up the signature of the crop residue burning, but it's a very distinct signature. And even if it's like 10% of all total emissions, it's a huge deal. So just to be in that pie and accounting for more than 10 to right now, we think that emissions from the residential and the agriculture sector together account for 50% of total emissions all over India. So, which is a very, very important thing to sort of look at, because the strategies for intervention is, quite similar. We have lots of marginalized communities who don't have a choice to transition to a cleaner technology, and these are going to be the most hard to get to in terms of behavioral transitions, or find the money for sort of really accounting them for transitioning. And and we also have a quite recent, a disease burden estimation that is linked to particular sectors. And currently, using the standard methods of the GBD to sort of really looking at source-specific disease, mortality estimates. It really looks at about a million deaths, a million plus deaths attributable to ambient PM 2.5, primarily from four sectors: residential combustion, industry, power generation, and agriculture. So the entire PM 2.5 attributable mortality in India is essentially accounted by these four sectors, and everything else is much smaller. So agriculture right now stands at 10%, which I think is right now a big underestimate. It's not quite there yet, because we've just begun to recognize even these contributions. So I'll conclude here with some thoughts for our discussions, and I think the source-specific emission, exposure, and health burden estimates consistently point to the large and inequitable burden in LMICs and in South Asia, of course. So sources that are important for the poorest of the countries in in South Asia are not necessarily the most important sources, in the rest of the world, and but yet they bear, bulk of the burden. And addressing the contributions from agriculture sector has implications for air quality, agricultural productivity, and sustainability. So when you burn the crop, it's not just, it's just like the household argument. When you harvest it non-renewably and you burn, you end up, impacting air quality, you end up impacting climate and health, of course. But in the particular case of agricultural emissions, burning that piece of agricultural crop residue has huge implications for agricultural productivity and sustainability. And there have been many studies, from in the agricultural department that are sort of really looking at sectoral solutions to get some, something done for the marginalized farmer. But the most important thing is, if you're wanting to sort of really, this morning in the plenary session, they talked about, especially for India, we have to look at hyperlocal surveillance, because the complexity in the exposure attributions and the sectoral attributions are just way too much. We can't chew off, everything all at one go. So hyperlocal surveillance would be a great way of sort of moving forward, whether they are, based. I mean, we can talk about technologies that are available right now, but without that, the linkage to health are going to be really difficult, and the case for interventions is going to be really difficult. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share share my thoughts on an area that I'm no expert at, and appreciate the opportunity to bring up this issue for discussion.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Eri Saikawa, and I'm a professor in the Environmental Sciences Department at Emory University. It's great to be able to follow Kalpana. So I thought she would be talking about the crop residue burning, and I wanted to start off with that. So some of the work that I've done is in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. That includes the Indo-Gangetic Plain that she was talking about. And I think it's really important to see the emission factor. I'm not sure if you're able to see that, but the crop residue burning is second from the left. So we talk about household cook stove burning, how much emissions it creates. These crop residue burning, as you can see from these figures, it really has very high emission factors. And I think we don't do enough work to see what other chemicals might also be produced from that too. It's not just about PM 2.5. The chemical composition is extremely important, especially for human health. And I think we really do need to do more work on that. And I just wanted to showcase, there was a lot of work that, especially India, it's so important. But this is not just happening in India. This is the work that we've been trying to look at in Guatemala. And Lucas Juan is here. He's created these figures. And you can see from the ground-based measurements that we are doing a huge seasonality that Kalpana was just talking about. And we believe that this is from the crop residue burning, at least partially, but we don't have enough measurements to be really able to say that. And there are satellite measurements, but when we compare the satellite-based estimates and the ground-based measurements, there's a big differences. And if we don't have enough measurements on the ground, it's really difficult. We all know that ambient measurements and indoor measurements and personal measurements, they are very different. And to get to the exposure, I think we really need to get to the personal, but we are really not there. So I've already talked about the satellite-derived PM 2.5 that already shows the trends, but the differences with these measurements, these estimates, and the ambient-based measurements, there's quite a bit difference. But I wanted to also focus on the agriculture-based emissions because I think we don't necessarily talk a lot about the agriculture emissions per se, but agriculture is fascinating because they emit a lot of emissions, especially ammonia that we don't talk about, and that can have a lot of PM impact, but also emit a lot of greenhouse gases. So carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide come out of agriculture as well. This is a nice figure that I always use because it talks about the economic impact and as well as the health impact. And how can we really think about different agricultural practices that can potentially lead us to a better approach to reduce all these emissions? So I talked about ammonia. 92% in this estimate is coming from agriculture. And we really don't regulate ammonia enough. And so then ammonia gets emitted, and then they form a lot of particles. And right now, because NOx is being reduced, because we are not having a lot of regulation for ammonia, it's becoming a huge issue. And I think there is so much that we could do in the agricultural sector to really reduce the particle concentrations. So what we are trying to look at is there's a lot of buzzwords, climate smart agriculture, but I think a lot of people are focusing a lot on the carbon sequestration. How much can we sequester carbon from the agricultural field? But I think we should go further than that, and to be able to reduce emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and ammonia emissions at the same time. Is there a way to do that so that we can all benefit? There's so many co-benefit opportunities here. And I think we're not using that enough. And what do I mean by that is, oh, sorry, before I go to that, I just wanted to showcase some of the field work that we do. So we set up these tents And then we try to understand how much emissions come out of these agricultural soil. And this is especially important because we put a lot of fertilizer, depending on what kind of agriculture practices that you use. And we know very well that if we put fertilizer, there's a lot of ammonia and there's a lot of nitrous oxide that come out. But we also know that there are some that really think that, for example, biochar implementation is important. But what I'm showing you here in this graph is methane. I'm not really sure if you can see that, but we actually do see a huge spike for methane in the biochar plot when there's a lot of moisture. So what I would like to say is that there is really more work that's needed to figure out what kind of agricultural practices that we should be looking for to really look at all the pollutants together. And I just mentioned about ammonia, and I think there is a lot of potential that we can do for agriculture in ecosystems together. Black carbon, I didn't talk about, but in the next slide, I would also like to show how plastic mulch is often used a lot. It's considered to be a great way to increase yield, and it's used in organic setting nowadays. But they also get burnt. 2% of plastic use now comes from global plastic mulch in agriculture. So I think that's something that we really should think about. That's not the big focus that I see nowadays, but I think that's really important for also for soil health, etc., that we need to think about. So I just wanted to end. I think it was very clear that crop residue burning is very important, obviously, and we think about that a lot. But there are so many other emissions that come out of agricultural soil, and thinking about what kind of solutions can we actually have, not just looking at air pollution, not just looking at air pollution and health, but also the intersection among air pollution, climate change, and health. And so I was talking about the field work that we were doing, and so we tried to understand how agricultural practices really impact these emissions. So there were 4 practices that we used. One is the conventional, that's bare soil, and the other one was called living mulch. So what we did was we used the white clover, that is a perennial, and that's nitrogen fixer. So we grow that together with corn or maize, so that it can actually produce, it can actually act as a nitrogen fertilizer. So there are, I think, a lot of different ways that we should be thinking about. And the plastic mulch picture is there, and that is really concerning for me right now for soil health and also for air pollution perspective as well. So thank you so much, and I will stop there.
Just the clicker. That was great. I mean, I've already learned something about plastic mulch, so thank you for that. I had no idea. So my name's Sarah Vogel. I'm the Senior Vice President for Healthy Communities at the Environmental Defense Fund. I'm really honored to be on the stage with you all and really pleased to hopefully really learn a lot, as Kalpana was saying in this session. Just briefly, those of you not familiar with my organization, we are a science-based environmental advocacy organization that's been working to really support healthy people on a planet by advocating for evidence-based climate solutions. So specific, I think, to today's discussion, we do work on clean air and health issues, as well as have a big focus on methane emissions across multiple sectors, including the ag space. My role is to really work with all of our teams to really put a public health, take a public health perspective on that. So that's taking a much more integrated approach. So I think we're already getting there. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion. And I think, as many have said, agriculture has been this overlooked sector. But it is a significant contributor to air pollution and obviously climate pollution. And if we can build these kind of integrated solutions that account for multiple pollutants, we're going to be able to find these sort of win-win solutions. So I thought I'll just do a really quick overview of where probably all the different emissions are coming when we talk about agriculture, because agriculture is so huge. Um, but then I want to focus on livestock. So I'm glad I went at the end because I'm going to talk about things that are not what you want to be thinking about when you're eating, because we're going to talk about manure. Um, but food production, so think about it. There's activities from pesticide application, synthetic fertilizer application, tillage. We heard a lot about crop residue burning, the management of animals and their waste. So you've got pollutants, ranging from volatile organic compounds, nitrogen oxides, ammonia, particulate matter, as well as the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, which we'll talk about, and nitrous oxide. We know those pollutants can warm the planet, can directly affect our health, degrade the air, and we don't have to tell this audience what that means, along with a warming climate. So this is interesting. So I was digging into the ammonia, and we already have different global statistics. So that's interesting because I think there's a lot, right? There's a lot to be done here, but it is considered the largest source of ammonia. So probably anywhere from 80 to 92% of ammonia is coming from agriculture, and that ammonia is coming a lot from livestock. The management of waste and synthetic fertilizers. So I'm going to come back, as I promised, to manure in a bit. We know that ammonia can mix in the atmosphere with other combustion emissions to form particulate matter. And in some parts of the world, that may be a significant contribution to PM. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, and there's lots of contributions from weather and different agricultural practices. It looks like a very complex space. But agriculture is also a dominant source of methane globally. So I'm sure everyone knows this, of course, but methane is an incredibly potent greenhouse gas. It traps more than 80% times the heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide during the first 20 years after it's released, and may be responsible as up to a third of the warming that we're experiencing right now. So that, in part, is why our organization and many others have really looked at where can we find those solutions now to drive down methane immediately as we do the work to decarbonize the rest of the sector. But methane also contributes to the formation of ground level ozone. Again, I don't need to tell this audience what that means in terms of increased health risks. So where then are the methane emissions coming from in the ag sector? So if you just, this is obviously a simplified version, but a lot of those emissions, so of the about 40%, over 70% is coming from livestock. And a lot within that, both for ammonia and for methane, are coming from cattle. And that is expected to increase anywhere from 50% by 2050 due to rising populations, increased demand for meat and dairy. And some of the biggest emitters are India and Latin America. So of then livestock methane, there are really two sources. The first is this manure management, which is a significant source of methane and ammonia. Then the other big source of methane comes from essentially cow burps. Not the farts. It comes from the burps. It's always important to say. So our organization has focused on 3 solutions on the methane side, I'll just briefly talk about the first 2 because I really want to come to the manure solutions. The first has been optimizing productivity of livestock, and there we've looked with partners to think about how do you improve the animal nutrition, improve the animal health, which can deliver more highly nutritious milk, which is a main source of nutrition for about 1 billion people in the world. and it can reduce methane emissions. And then there's a whole field of these enteric solutions, which have huge barriers in terms of costs, access and equitability of those costs, deployment, and uptake. So, manure management. I think why it's important to talk about manure management is because you have an ability to address these two really important sources of both methane and ammonia and deal with a lot of community concerns. So manure is often concentrated, and what can be called slurry, which is the sort of the urine component as well, can get concentrated in lagoons in these open pits, and then sprayed and applied as fertilizer. And all of those activities can be significant sources of ammonia and methane, with levels rising rapidly over the past 30 years, probably similar to the crop residue, because you're getting these industrialized, concentrated agricultural systems. So one of the things we've looked at is the possible available solutions for well-managed biogas digesters that can capture the methane and then convert it to a cleaner source of energy, including electricity, but natural gas. The key, though, here is really this well-managed part, because there can be a lot of leaks and inadvertent releases. And one of the important pieces is that when you have these digesters, it creates what's called digestate. And if that is then released into an open lagoon or pit, it will release quite a bit of ammonia. So the key thing is to be covering these open pits and making sure that that's not lost to the atmosphere. There are small scale, and you guys maybe are probably way more knowledgeable about this, but efforts to do small scale biogas digesters that can take manure from like 2 cows and capture the methane for direct use. Again, you can see the covered digestate, that being incredibly important on the ammonia impacts, ammonia emissions. And then, ideally that is replacing direct biomass burning in the home for cooking. And I raise that just in closing, in that I think what's interesting about the agricultural space is that this brings in a whole new sector to engage with, and that includes farmers, farming communities, and many other kind of working in their agricultural space that may not be thinking about these health concerns, but are actually having a lot of direct health impacts. And I think there's a real opportunity to build partners and champions within this community. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, Ariel, Kalpana, for your wonderful presentations and for helping us to discuss about the impacts of agriculture on air pollution and climate change, and what is also being implemented, and the linkages and opportunities that this brings us to action. Before going to the open Q&A session, we would like to project a video from WHO, Cristina Romanelli. Thank you to our support team, technical support team. You can send it.
Distinguished participants, esteemed colleagues and friends, agriculture has long nourished us, but in today's world, it's also contributing, often invisibly, to a growing health burden. With air pollution on the rise, a breath of fresh air, both literal and political, is long overdue. I'd like to offer some reflections on how we can reimagine agriculture through a One Health lens to reduce emissions, advance equity, and protect both people and planet. I'll speak briefly to 3 themes. Why agricultural air pollution is a public health and equity concern, how a One Health approach offers scalable and transformative solutions, and finally, with a call to action to strengthen integration, investment, and accountability. So why does air pollution matter in agriculture? Globally, air pollution causes over 7 million premature deaths every single year, largely from heart disease, stroke, chronic respiratory conditions, and lung cancer. While urban traffic and energy systems often dominate the air pollution conversation, agriculture is a significant and growing source, and one that's too often overlooked in public health and climate strategies. Main contributors include crop burning, which releases PM 2.5 and black carbon, fertilizers emitting ammonia that forms secondary PM 2.5, and methane from livestock, which contributes to ground level ozone. Globally, agriculture accounts for over 90% of ammonia emissions and around 40% of methane. In South Asia, stubble burning contributes up to 50% of seasonal PM 2.5 spikes. These impacts fall hardest on farm workers, rural communities, and children, especially those with limited access to healthcare or clean technologies. We also have to consider impacts on Indigenous peoples whose low emission biodiversity supportive practices are often displaced by polluting industrial systems. Addressing air pollution from agriculture is not only a matter of environmental urgency, it's a matter of health equity and human rights. So how can One Health drive solutions? A One Health approach connects human, animal, plant, and ecosystem health, helping us to respond in a more coordinated and systemic way. 3 priorities stand out. First, scale up sustainable practices with health, climate, and biodiversity co-benefits. No-burn agriculture, composting, and regenerative methods can reduce PM 2.5 by over 80%. Agroforestry improves soil health, supports biodiversity, and improves microclimate. Integrated pest management reduces pesticide use and contributes to improving air quality. The IPCC and the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services highlight that nature-based solutions in land systems could deliver up to 30% of global mitigation needed by 2030 while supporting food security and health. The second One Health opportunity is to align agriculture and air quality policies. The EU, India, and China have all demonstrated that some policy reforms can reduce ammonia and crop burning emissions. One Health provides the structure to align health and environmental outcomes with agricultural reform. The third opportunity centers on equity and traditional knowledge. A rights-based approach means protecting knowledge systems, ensuring inclusive governance, and investing in regenerative, not extractive models. So what's needed now is clear. First, including agricultural emissions, especially ammonia and methane, in national air quality and climate strategies. Second, operationalizing global frameworks, including those you may be less familiar with, but offer great potential, such as the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, especially Target 7, and the Joint Plan of Action on One Health from WHO and our quadripartite partners. Finally, invest in community-led solutions, integrated methods, integrated metrics, and systems that really genuinely deliver co-benefits. Air pollution from agriculture can be significantly reduced, and solutions, when shaped through a One Health lens to benefit health, environment, and sustainability, are within reach. We are committed to working with countries, communities, and all of you to support this transformation. Let's move from fragmentation to integration and from short-term fixes to systemic change. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to the outcomes.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you all of you for listening to the video. Well, there is certainly several opportunities, and we would love to hear from you guys at this moment. We are opening up the panel for questions. If you have any questions, we have Pier Paolo Mudu that will bring you the microphone.
Hello? Hello? Yeah.
It was the wrong person. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. My name is Anna Gran. I come from the Ministry of Environment of Denmark, and I actually do not have a question, but just a small comment. And we've received a lot of attention for a new agreement, political agreement in Denmark, and that is the tax or the climate tax on livestock, which is CO2E, a CO2 equivalent tax. But since it's on livestock, of course, it is very much a methane tax. And this initiative, this agreement, started up as a huge consultation between ministries. So it started in the agricultural corner, together with the Ministry of Food, together with the Ministry of Environment, together with the Minister of Treasury, and the representative, the Council for Agriculture, and the green NGOs. So it was a huge consultation process to see how can we, well, to start up with the tax, the climate tax on livestock, but how could we create solutions to many of the objectives, environmental objectives related to agriculture. So what started as a tax on livestock actually developed into, well, if you want to reduce a part of this tax, for example, you can have a deduction if you will take out some of your agricultural soil, for example, the low-lying peatlands that are rich on carbon, and instead give that back to nature or plant forest, for example. There will be another tax on liming your soil. There will be additional grants for those farmers who will not only to lay out your or stop the agriculture production on ley-long soils, but also grants for deployment of new technology and so on. So I just wanted to flag that there are some solutions that maybe start as a climate deal, but there will be huge benefits for health, for the air quality, ammonia, of course, and not the least methane. So just a small example.
Thank you so much. Over here, Pierre.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es...
Good afternoon, my name is Carolina Basaldo. I'm the mayor of province in Cordoba in Argentina. It's an agro-industrial region. We have over 8,000 hectares, and I would like to ask a question. We've been working with the agricultural sector in a sustainable, practical model because we had a lot of different healthcare issues, respiratory diseases, a lot of traffic of trucks in our locality. Along with universities, we're trying to measure air, but particularly a model of biological runways for pollination, biodiversity related to agriculture. What kind of practices do you think you can contribute to this experience that we are rolling out in over 3,000 hectares that produces over 3,000 tons of soybean during the high season? Bueno, lo siento, no, no hablo español, pero muchas gracias por la pregunta. Yo creo que en realidad es sumamente importante pensar al respecto de qué tipo de manejo integrado podemos realizar. Una de las prácticas agrícolas que estábamos mostrando es muy similar a las prácticas comerciales que se están haciendo. Utilizar cultivos perennes junto con, por ejemplo, ganadería, eso puede incrementar
bees to come as well if you don't apply the pesticides. And so there are a lot of multiple benefits that we can have, not having fertilizer, not tilling, and increasing biodiversity, and potentially also reducing the emissions. So I think we really need to think about that kind of a framework, not just how can we reduce air pollution. And I forgot to talk about this in my talk, but I think it's also important to emphasize if we reduced air pollution, then we would also not reduce the agricultural crop yield reduce, because air pollution has a huge impact on reducing crop yields depending on what kind of crops. So I think that's also important. Like there is so much benefit, not just for health, but also economically by enhancing crop yield. And we should really be thinking about that too.
Thank you, Erin. And I want to take advantage of that question to ask also to Kalpana. What actions do you think are needed to recognize the importance of integrating air pollution within agricultural practices? You present some of the evidence. You can let us know.
Yeah, I think, at least for air quality management per se, associated with especially crop residue burning, there's many things that are possible because there are now low-cost sensing technologies that will at least allow us to sort of gather some baseline trends in the air quality and to sort of use that as a means of really looking at either sensitizing about the overall rural ambient air quality management, because it's not something that's thought about even by the regulators so much, because there is no monitoring session. The whole focus is on attainment in the neighboring cities. So increasing the surveillance on air quality is sort of a very important prerequisite, because otherwise, the whole premise of what's being impacted in terms of local air quality versus airshed air quality is not going to be possible. The second thing is to sort of also look at how we can really target the marginalized communities there. And to Aria's point on to sort of really, in the short term, it really looks like agricultural crop residue burning will actually increase yield because you can have two planting seasons. But in the long term, the loss in soil fertility and the increased use of fertilizers and the inability for livestock to sort of really use the agricultural feed that can come up from the burning, all sort of make it totally economically unviable, even in a short span of about 10 to 20 years. So that needs to be sort of factored into the overall environmental management, not just air quality management or environmental or climate related management.
Thank you, Kalpana. And Sarah, I love your presentation and the emphasis that you put together onto climate change, air quality. It looked like agricultural land use. Actually, when we start measuring agricultural emissions from air pollution, we are seeing that it is a huge contribution. It's already a huge contributor to climate change. You also link it with household air pollution and health gains. It looks like we have like a missing area of opportunity when we are talking about agriculture. Can you let us know your thoughts on what are the links to be emphasized within NDCs with the opportunities to address agricultural emissions, air pollution, and climate change?
Yeah, it's a good question. And one of the things I started to learn in talking to my colleagues and digging in on this is, there's been such concern about ammonia and its impact and nitrogen in the system on for good reasons, right? For water pollution, and it's been dealt with in the policy space within kind of an agricultural lens, but not within our kind of air policy frameworks. So, you know, we look at we monitor and measure and have target goals for precursors to PM, but we don't include largely ammonia. And so I think it's a classic silo, right? So, and I think broadening that out, and then similarly, the other silo has been, you know, just looking at, you know, where's the methane coming from, and you know, while most of the methane that's coming from from agriculture, and most of that's coming from livestock, are, you know, many of folks on our team are really looking at this manure space because you can actually have multiple benefits. There are low cost interventions now, even though we need to deal with these other huge sources of methane. But that only comes when you take a collective lens. And I think part of it has been kind of bringing the communities together. We had a chance with support from the Wellcome Trust to bring people together across ag and oil and gas and the waste sector to think about where can we take either a One Health approach or really a public health lens to thinking about how do we get more health benefits from the methane mitigation strategies that we're deploying. And that means thinking about multiple pollutants, right? And so it's a mind shift, but then I think if we can change some of our policy approaches and just bring ammonia into the tent, that will help.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for your comments. Is there any other question from the audience? Over there, Pierre.
Thank you, Juan Felipe Franco from Colombia. Yeah, of course, we are talking here about agriculture and the impacts, but I haven't seen so many actors from the agriculture sector in this conference, for example. And the question would be, yeah, how can we engage the sector to be part of the conversation? Because of course we want the agriculture sectors and their impacts to be part of the conversations, but how can we involve them?
Pierre, can we take another question over here and then we tackle them both together? Thank you, Juan Felipe.
Hi, thank you to the entire panel. I'm Sophia Samancha-Roy with Health Policy Watch. So something that caught my attention is thinking about involving the community. And Sarah, you were mentioning that, you know, communities are very concerned when there's, you know, fertilizer being sprayed in their homes or across their neighborhoods. So I'm just wondering a little bit about community engagement and how we get people aware that this is an issue across crop burning in India versus maybe manure and fertilizer issues in the US. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, Sophia. Well, we have two great questions about community engagement and sectorial engagement. And I also want to make a quick comment on that. We were talking with Pierre that this is one of the first times that as WHO also we are having this space to discuss this topic, and certainly it's an area of opportunity that we want to explore. And we celebrate that now we are talking here about this and acknowledge the need to expand the stakeholders that need to be involved in this conversation. So please feel free to comment on those questions.
Okay, I will start. Thank you so much for those two questions. I think that's so important and very related. So in the project that we have that's mainly focused on climate smart agriculture, we've really focused on targeting and engaging the farmers. And what we learned, especially in the US, is that when we have the word climate, a lot of farmers didn't want to be engaged. And they said that they think when they are engaged with researchers, then they're just told what to do, and they were very upset And I think that is a very common thing that we do. And there is so much disconnect with how we do research and how farmers farm. And farmers know so much about how they, how things grow. And when I was talking to them, they said, like, it was amazing that you listened to us. We invited the farmer to tell us about their practices and how they thought about the project. And they said that this never happens, and we really would like to talk, but we are never invited, especially like for the climate assessment. Like there is an agricultural sector, but no voice of farmers is included. So how can we amplify their voices and work with them? I think that's a very important issue. Just the same thing as the community engagement. It really impacts their own health, and they know that clearly about the synthetic fertilizers and the pesticides. I'm not really sure how it's the case for other countries other than the U.S. I haven't had a chance to do that, but I think the collaboration is so key. So not just having policymakers and the scientists, but really being able to engage these stakeholders is really important.
I'll just build on that because it's such the two questions are great together, and I think your point is so well taken, because taking a community-based approach with the farming community has been really key, and that's something that we've been doing as well, is really engaging farmers where they're at. We often don't talk about climate change. What are their concerns? And then I think the other piece of taking this One Health approach is to really think about what are the other concerns that especially small-scale farmers have. What are they struggling with? Because improving the nutritional value of their animals and the livelihoods of their animals can bring enormous multiple benefits right into the home. And so again, it's really it's doing that real engagement, right? You're actually listening. You're not coming with your own agenda. It's the basics of that approach applied to these other sectors. And I think the other piece, and I don't know how this is in other communities, but the farming community is so powerful in the United States. So as an ally, it can be incredibly transformative.
Yeah, I want to sort of echo these sentiments and your point about, them not being at the table for this conversation. I think is a very important one because, we've not, out of all the sectors, I guess the transport and the power have been most represented in the conversation, but agriculture and certainly a sector close to my heart, the household sector, there is no one person that you can sort of, pinpoint and say, okay, if I cover not even one, a set of people, because they are just all so distributed and the concerns are sort of so heterogeneous in terms of, whether you're a marginalized farmer in southern India versus, a large scale farmer. Even if you're a large scale farmer, what kind of constraints do you have in northern India, for example? So so we really have to sort of look at how to. We don't have an answer, but the WHO has had a session where we can sort of link health and air quality and climate to a sector that has traditionally not been included. It's a great first step, I think. And this has to figure in the national clean air programs in a much more definitive way. I don't think, well, there is agriculture listed in the National Clean Air Program in India as a sector, but I don't think we are thinking in terms of sort of looking at secondary pollutants or, for that matter, the linkages to climate co-benefits in that. It's primarily agricultural crop residue burning. That's only a small part of the whole discourse. And also to the point about community engagement, it's a very important one. Most of the time that even for a small part of the agricultural emissions, such as crop residue burning, there have been excellent technology solutions in India that have been put forth already by the Indian Council for Agricultural Research, but there is no uptake by the small and marginalized farmers. Clearly, this is not something either that has had enough reach to them, or not developed consultatively enough. It works, that and it has been shown that it works, but it's not something that the community is accepting readily, and therefore whatever the barriers are for adoption are not being thought through, in this technology engagement. And it's a very manageable piece if only the communities were involved much more strongly, I think. So both those points are really useful for us to think about it going forward.
Thank you, Kalpana. Thank you, Erin, Sarah, Pier Paolo, and of course all of you. It has been a great session, and we also are taking a lot of notes on how to integrate this into our action plan that is coming over in the next few months. So please give it up for our panelists at this time. If you have been here during the morning sessions, you have seen that Pier Paolo has created a masterpiece. So following session is going to be the health benefits of land use. So please stay with us, stay tuned. He's working a beautiful art here. And we invite our panelists here for the picture. Picture over here, Pierre. Can we play some background music while the transition? ¿Podemos poner música mientras la transición?